Today, Professor Quillnox announced, his voice a smooth, gelatinous wobble, we explore a crucial cornerstone of xenobiological study, the analysis of benign fauna. Immediately, Kron groaned, visibly, loudly. It wasn't subtle. Across the gleaming, curved lecture hall of Section Theta Beta 12, 37 students from 15 worlds simultaneously turned their oculars, stalks, and photosensitive ridges toward the sound of discontent. Kron, a squat Grokken with armored chitin and the social grace of a rock slide, was slumped against his gravity field cushion like it owed him money. "Permission to speak, Professor," he grumbled. Professor Quillnox sighed. "Yes, Kron." "Why?" Kron said, his mandibles clacking with genuine irritation. "Do we keep wasting class hours on harmless species? We're training to become survival field xenobiologists. I want to study things that can melt my face, not sniff my boots." A ripple of murmured agreement passed through a few of the students, mostly from Deathworld class civilizations. The flibbit in the front row, however, turned a shade of lavender so deep it looked like his skin had just witnessed war crimes. Professor Quillnox gave an amused vibration. "Because, dear Kron, it is precisely the unassuming species that often lead to galactic upheaval. We study them because our assumptions kill more often than plasma bolts." From the back row came a sharp snort, followed by a muffled yawn. The noise did not belong to a flibbit, or a Grokken, or a Valtari. It belonged to the only member of species 001-Sul. Jake. Jake was human. He sat sprawled in a sideways slouch, legs draped over one arm of the chair, one boot tapping out a rhythm only he could hear. His other hand gripped a matte black thermos with the word NASA scribbled on it in peeling white ink. His eyes were half-lidded. His soul was somewhere between barely present and entirely on strike. "You're late," Professor Quillnox noted dryly. Jake grunted. "I'm early for the nap." A few students chittered nervously. Professor Quillnox, having long since learned that time was relative and sarcasm didn't translate well across 12 languages, gestured toward the human with an appendage that shimmered like slow-moving jellyfish. "You appear unwell." "I'm fine," Jake muttered, unscrewing the thermos with the reverence of someone defusing a bomb. "Just need some liquid sanity." Professor Quillnox tilted his gelatinous head. "Pardon." Jake took a long, slow sip from the container. Every student in the room froze. The flibbit turned yellow, bright, neon, nauseated yellow, because the smell hit them, thick, burnt, bitter, an aroma that screamed danger to anything with olfactory receptors not forged in the pits of a collapsing sun. Professor Quillnox flinched slightly. "What is that?" Jake blinked. "Coffee." The word carried weight. It sounded mundane in galactic standard, but it hit like a cultural landmine. Kron sniffed, recoiled, and hissed. "Poison. That's poison." "No," Jake said with a lazy grin. "That's breakfast." Several datapads pinged as students scrambled to look up coffee. The first result brought a collective gasp. Caffeine, classified as a neurostimulant toxic to 94% of sentient species. Ingesting more than 0.3 milliliters per kilo of body mass may result in seizures, hallucinations, or spontaneous molting. Jake took another sip. "Humans drink that?" whispered a student from the aquatic section, her gill fronds twitching. "Voluntarily," Jake said. "You require it to function?" Professor Quillnox asked, stunned. Jake shrugged. "Some of us. Depends. I mean, I can run without it. But with it, I can sprint through the 9th layer of hell while writing a thesis and bench-pressing a rhino." Everyone stared. Jake took another sip. "I don't need coffee," he added, "but without it, I start reading ancient war poetry in reverse and challenging vending machines to duels." The flibbit fainted. No one caught him. Professor Quillnox recomposed himself. "You're saying this substance is part of your daily ritual?" Jake grinned. "It's a way of life." "May we examine it?" the professor asked. Jake held the thermos closer to his chest. "You can look, but you can't touch. I've only got one cup left, and I'm not ready to meet God without it." The class chuckled nervously. One brave student raised a hand. Why would you consume a chemical that causes increased heart rate, tremors, insomnia, and possible hallucinations? Jake stared at her, then leaned forward. Because I've got 3 term papers due, 2 lab exams in 4 hours, and my roommate tried to cook spaghetti in a toaster last night and nearly killed us both. Coffee doesn't just keep me alive. He took one final sip, then slammed the lid shut. It makes me feel powerful. There was silence. Absolute silence. Then Crone whispered, "How do you metabolize it?" Jake blinked. "Liver, mostly. Or rage. Depends on the day." The aquatic student next to him quietly slid her chair a few inches away. The flibbit, now revived, whispered to no one in particular, "They drink rocket fuel and smile." Professor Quillnox straightened. "This is a prime example of why we must study every species thoroughly. Even the most harmless seeming can harbor bizarre adaptations. In this case," he nodded toward Jake, "an alarming dependence on a substance that would kill most beings on contact." "I microdosed death before breakfast," Jake said proudly. Crone muttered, "You are the reason our species calls Earth a red zone planet." "Red?" Jake grinned. "Cute. Back home we call that a medium day." The class ended 20 minutes early, not because the lesson was over, because no one could focus anymore. The spiral of mental chaos Jake had unleashed was irreversible. Notes were abandoned. The flibbit requested therapy. Crone requested Jake's thermos for scientific study. Jake declined on the grounds of "not today, Satan." Professor Quillnox stayed behind as the chamber emptied. Jake, as usual, was the last to leave. "Mr. Jake," the professor said softly. Jake paused at the door. "Yes, Professor." Quillnox hesitated. "Do all humans drink coffee?" Jake smiled, then flipped open the thermos lid one last time. "No," he said, eyes gleaming. "Some drink espresso." And then he was gone, leaving only the smell of caffeine and fear. Professor Quillnox didn't sleep that night. Not because he was over-caffeinated, his physiology lacked the enzymes to even process caffeine, but because he'd spent 6 hours combing through the human cultural database, trying to understand why a species would weaponize a beverage against themselves. He found memes, he found quotes, he found entire religions structured around morning brews, and worse, he found double shots. By the time his class reconvened, the flibbit student, Yearly, still lemon-yellow with trauma, was already seated farthest from the human. He'd brought a personal ventilation bubble to filter any trace scent molecules. Crone, however, looked excited. "Professor," Crone grunted the moment Quillnox oozed into place. "I've done field research." Quillnox sighed. "Please tell me it didn't involve experimental ingestion." "No," Crone said. "Even I like living. But I watched 400 hours of human coffee rituals and made a chart." He held up a hollow screen filled with graphs. One showed average productivity versus cups consumed. The next was titled Correlation Between Coffee Intake and Violent Genius. The last simply read, Number of Wars Avoided, directly attributed to proper morning dose. Jake arrived 5 minutes late again. Same thermos, same slouch, same dead-eyed look of a soul hovering somewhere between astral projection and homicide. "Today," Professor Quillnox began, voice wobbling slightly, "we examine human evolutionary biology and its alarming compatibility with neurotoxic substances." Jake grunted. "You're still on about the bean juice," the flibbit hissed and recoiled. Crone practically growled. "You said that like it's a nickname." Jake raised an eyebrow. "It is." Quillnox took a breath. "Mr. Jake, would you be willing to assist us in a controlled demonstration?" Jake stared at the room full of aliens, most of whom were looking at him like he was a live bomb wrapped in tinsel. He grinned. "Sure. What could possibly go wrong?" The class moved to Lab Room Delta 9, Biohazard Containment and Analysis. That was, coincidentally, the only room with an active emergency defibrillator, riot suppressant foam, and a "Do not lick anything" sign in 12 languages. Jake stood on the observation platform, holding a fresh thermos, this one labeled Emergency Brew, Handle with Regret. The liquid inside hissed faintly. Quillnox spoke into the intercom. "Please describe your typical dosage." Jake unscrewed the lid. "Depends on the situation. Today's a 3-scoop day. Had a dream someone called it just a drink. Woke up sweating." A ripple of unease passed through the students. He took a sip. Vitals? Quillnox asked. A student called out readings. Heart rate elevated, core temp rising, pupil dilation increasing, neural activity spiking, wait. She stared. His brain just rearranged itself. Jake's voice was calm. Oh yeah, that's the caffeine unlocking my fourth thought layer. Yearly gasped. Fourth? Yep. First is panic. Second is ideas. Third is questioning my life choices. Fourth is when I become productive enough to scare myself. Does it hurt? One whispered. Jake blinked. Only if I stop. Crone stepped forward. Request to test interspecies exposure. Before Quillnox could protest, Crone placed a sealed sample of coffee inside a chemical analysis chamber. The chamber screamed. Literally. The lights flickered. 5 students fainted. The coffee burned through a heat-resistant vial and left a hole in the desk. Crone looked up in awe. It's alive. No, Jake said. That was decaf. Panic followed. Someone activated a containment shield. Yearly hit the floor, twitching. The aquatic student's gills shut down. Quillnox had to initiate the emergency calming protocol, ambient whale sounds, and the scent of neutral flowers. Only Jake remained unfazed, sipping peacefully like a god among chaos. When the foam cleared and the alarm silenced, Quillnox wiped his lenses. Mr. Jake. Yes, Professor? What happens if a human drinks too much? Jake's expression turned distant. My cousin did that once. And? He painted his apartment ceiling while writing a breakup song and simultaneously running for city council. Did he win? He lost. Jake took a long sip. But the ceiling looked amazing. Later that day, an emergency council meeting was called on campus, not for war, not for plague, but to review the presence of a human thermos on school grounds. The dean requested a motion to ban stimulants classified as death nectar. Jake simply walked past the conference window with a second thermos and waved. The motion failed. 3 days after the decaf disaster, as it came to be known, the galactic campus had enforced new protocols. No open human containers allowed in shared airspace. All xenobiology lectures involving humans must include emergency tranquilizer drones. Jake's thermos had to be scanned, analyzed, and given a war-grade hazard classification before every entry. Jake found this hilarious, mostly because the scanners kept breaking. On day 4, he walked into Professor Quillnox's class with a brand new thermos labeled, "Do not open unless ready to meet your maker." Naturally, Crone asked what was in it. Jake smirked. "Espresso." "What's that?" Crone asked, suspicious. Jake leaned in. "It's coffee, but concentrated, like black hole dense." Yearly's skin turned fluorescent green. Today's class topic, metabolic risk factors in interplanetary environments, which, unfortunately, was immediately abandoned when Jake offered the class a micro-sample to study. He poured a single drop into a containment vial. That drop hissed, boiled, and melted a reinforced Duraglass petri dish. "Fun fact," Jake said casually, "this stuff was banned by 3 human religions and 1 gym chain." Professor Quillnox stared in horror. "Why does it smell stronger than plasma fuel?" Jake took a sip, didn't even flinch. Crone whispered, "His organs must be reinforced." Another student muttered, "Or already dead." Quillnox tried to regain control. "We are here to study cross-species biochemical responses, not conduct chemical warfare." Jake raised his thermos in toast. Too late. Quillnox massaged what passed for a temple on his semi-translucent head. "Fine. Then let's examine the physiological effects of espresso on a human subject." "Gladly," Jake said, then immediately chugged half the thermos in one go. The monitor readings screamed. Heart rate, 200 beats per minute. Brainwave activity, off scale. Core temperature, 104 degrees Fahrenheit and rising. Adrenal output, yes. Liver function, display malfunctioned. Quillnox stammered, "Your body should be combusting." Jake grinned, eyes dilated. "Who says it's not?" 10 minutes later, Jake was pacing in circles, solving quantum field equations on the whiteboard and shouting at a vending machine that refused to believe in dreams. "I have the answers," he yelled at no one. "I just don't like them." Crone watched in awe. "He's transcending. He's operating on pure spite and caffeine." Jake spun to face them all. Does anyone have a fusion reactor? I think I can jump-start one with my hands. Yearly fainted again. Then came the moment. Jake pointed at the simulation cube, a high-tech projection system used for ecosystem modeling. I bet I can make a coffee ecosystem. No, Quillnox started. Yes, Jake shouted, already punching keys. The cube lit up, a forest of coffee plants. Each tree pulsed with heat. Birds screamed in jittery soprano. Bees moved too fast to be seen. And at the center stood a 30-foot-tall espresso golem. It roared, flung scalding steam from its arms, and turned the entire projected savanna into a caffeine-fueled inferno. The cube overheated and exploded. Lab Block C went dark. Every light within 500 meters dimmed. A student coughed. We just witnessed the invention of a Class 7 biome hazard. Jake blinked. Oops. Emergency protocols were initiated. Jake was temporarily banned from holding liquids. The thermos was locked in a containment vault labeled Unknown Energy Source, Do Not Approach. But the legend had begun. By the time the campus emergency crew had patched the simulation cube and restored auxiliary power, rumors had spread across 17 departments. Jake's espresso-fueled rampage was now referred to as the Awakening. Alien students began approaching him cautiously. Some asked to witness the coffee ritual. Others begged him to train them in caffeine resistance. One even offered him a star crystal in exchange for a single espresso bean. Jake refused. He said, "You're not ready." You still blink with both eyes. Professor Quillnox, however, had changed. Where once he'd seen Jake as an oddity, a chaotic anomaly with poor punctuality and even worse coffee breath, he now saw him as something else, a walking biological marvel, a harbinger of a species that had willingly domesticated a neurotoxin, made it a staple of their society, and then consumed it in casual social settings. He made a note in his private research log. Species 001, Homo sapiens, possess deeply disturbing metabolic tolerance, can weaponize joy, capable of adapting lethal substances for routine function, culturally glorify self-induced overclocking, suspected ability to bend causality when properly caffeinated. He underlined that last part. Twice. The invitation came in a fireproof envelope, delivered by a 6-limbed courier drone wearing blast shielding. Professor Quillnox opened it under a fume hood while wearing triple-layered gloves. Intergalactic Youth Science Symposium, he read. Theme, Frontiers of Biological Innovation. He paused. They want Jake. Crone gasped. They're inviting him to a symposium on innovation. He invented a caffeine-based forest monster, Quillnox muttered. I'm not even surprised anymore. Yearly had to be rehydrated after fainting again. The symposium was held on Xyris Prime, a neutral science colony with advanced shielding and emergency containment units on standby. Jake arrived wearing mirrored sunglasses, holding 2 thermoses, and chewing what looked suspiciously like raw espresso beans. The reception desk hesitated. Name? Jake. Affiliation? Jake looked around. Earth. Coffee division. No one questioned it. Each species presented their innovations. The Bulgoths showcased a regenerative slime serum that could regrow limbs. The Trinari demonstrated a gravitational bubble that allowed internal organs to float freely to avoid trauma during impacts. Jake sipped, then walked up to the stage, wearing a human university hoodie and a grin. He placed a mug on the presentation platform. This, he said, is a prototype. The mug hissed. A small holographic diagram appeared, showcasing internal compartments, heat regulators, and something ominously labeled Plan B, detonation. Ladies, gentlemen, and carbon-based oddities, this is the Brewceptor 9000. It keeps coffee at optimal murder temperature for 13.7 hours, but it's not just a thermos. He twisted the base. It clicked. The entire mug unfolded like a blooming mechanical flower. It's also a drone, a heater, a translator, a self-defense weapon, and a really judgmental AI named Barb. Good morning, Jake, said the mug. You're late again. Applause did not follow. Silence. And then the Bulgoth representative whispered, They weaponized breakfast. Things spiraled quickly. Jake, encouraged by the lack of immediate arrest, activated a brewing sequence. Steam hissed. Barb announced, starting caffeine infusion protocol. Everyone within a 5-meter radius should consider finalizing their wills. The symposium chairperson, a feathery Murnax elder, intervened. "Young man, this is not an acceptable demonstration." Jake raised an eyebrow. "You think I came to talk?" He took a sip. Barb hummed, "Vital signs spiking, user approaching euphoric productivity zone." Then Jake pulled out schematics. "Barb," he said, "show them what I've been building in my dorm." The holoprojector lit up. The diagram was insane. A spacecraft powered entirely by heat siphoned from boiling coffee. It was called the Java drive. It used zero fuel, just pressure, condensed caffeine vapor, and human stubbornness. The Murnax elder fainted. Crone was watching via livestream back on campus. He whispered, "He's doing it. He's showing them what we fear most." Yearly peeked from behind a pillow. "What?" "He's proving that humans don't innovate despite danger. They innovate through it. They flirt with extinction for a better morning." Back on Zyris Prime, the panel scrambled to shut him down. Security bots rushed the stage. Jake sipped again. Barb deployed a caffeine mist screen. "I cannot allow harm to come to my beverage." The room filled with fog. People ran. One judge tripped and claimed she saw her past lives in the vapor. Jake casually exited, sipping all the way out, leaving only a note on the lectern. "You'll want this. It's a prototype for interstellar mail using espresso grounds as dark matter seeds. Sincerely, Earth." He was banned from 4 science planets. The symposium was marked as a Class 5 hazardous event. But Jake returned to campus a legend. They greeted him with nervous applause and a new sign outside Lab Block C. "Warning, human caffeine zones beyond this point. Proceed with respect and snacks." Quillnox had no words. He just gave Jake a passing grade, an award, and a formal request to never submit another prototype without 12 weeks' notice and a hazard evaluation from 3 separate departments. Jake agreed, then pulled out a third thermos. "This one's decaf," he said. Quillnox flinched anyway. The transmission came at 3:12 a.m. Earth Standard Time, just as Jake was preparing his third pot of coffee. Barb, his AI mug, chirped, "Priority message, Galactic Council Emergency Summit. Attendance, mandatory. Topic, human beverages." Jake blinked. "Wait, we're having a galactic summit. About coffee," Barb replied. "Correction, about the potential threat of Earth-based neurostimulants and their proliferation as cultural weapons." Jake sipped. "Sounds about right." By the time Jake arrived at the summit, held on the neutral orbital station Virex 7, the room was a circus. Over 300 species represented. Tension thick enough to stir with a spoon. Admiral Groth of the Tavalk Dominion stood trembling. "We lost 3 research vessels to instant coffee. They overloaded their reactors trying to synthesize it." The Drali ambassador spoke next. "A single Earth beverage created a black market ring in Sector 9. We've lost control of 6 moons to a Frappuccino cult." Someone whispered, "One sip turned a Xylari monk into a DJ. He's still raving." At the center of it all, Jake, wearing a bathrobe, holding Barb. He took the microphone. "Ladies and whatever the rest of you are, look, I get it. You're scared." He paused, took a sip, continued casually. "You should be." A shudder rippled through the assembly. "But let me explain something about humans. We didn't just survive our planet, we thrived on it. Despite hurricanes, predators, financial systems, and early morning Mondays. Do you know how?" He held up Barb. "Because of this. Because we needed something so strong, so potent, that it could make us choose to live another day." The Dakar general barked, "This is madness. You use it recreationally." Jake nodded. "Exactly. Now imagine what happens when we weaponize it on purpose." Everyone fell silent. Jake smirked. "I'm here to offer you a choice, a treaty. We call it the Caffeine Accord." He clicked a button. Barb projected terms into the air. 1. Earth will license controlled exports of caffeinated beverages. 2. No caffeine-based weaponry to be used without mutual consent. 3. Every species will receive a tolerance training module, with waivers. 4th, Earth shall be recognized as the galactic authority on beverage-based biochemistry. And, Jake added, we want a holiday, Interstellar Coffee Day. The Xanax representative stood. I second it. The room erupted. 12 hours later, the treaty was signed. Jake returned to Earth not just a student, but an ambassador. His face was printed on mugs, coasters, and warning labels across 1,000 worlds. Barb gained sentience and a Twitter account, and every galactic officer was now required to pass the Jake protocol before interacting with a human. If a human appears tired, sweating, or says the word espresso, evacuate the room. Back in class, Quillnox stood beside Jake during a lecture. "You've changed the galaxy," he said, blinking slowly. Jake shrugged. I just told them the truth." Quillnox looked at the coffee machine Jake had built into the lab wall. It hummed ominously. "So, what are you working on now?" Jake's eyes twinkled. "Cold brew, in zero gravity." Quillnox sighed. "We're doomed." Epilogue. Years later, the Galactic Archives would record humanity's contribution to peace and progress. Some entries spoke of diplomacy, others of technology, but the most viewed entry of all was a simple file titled, "Why You Never Tell a Human It's Just a Drink," and underneath was a single image, Jake, holding Barb, grinning, as 302 alien ambassadors passed out behind him.